Hi, and welcome to my presentation on conflict scenarios. I'm Lorenz Stelmischek, and I will be examining intrapersonal and interpersonal value-based conflict. The first conflict is looking at moral injury as an intrapersonal conflict. So a quick overview, moral injury occurs when an individual experiences deeply troubling cognitive dissonance between their internal moral code and the actions that he or she engaged in or witnessed. Originally, it was used to broaden the scope of PTSD symptoms and causes in veterans, and includes but isn't limited to the internal conflict of living in direct violation of personal values, which may bring about a mental, emotional, and/or spiritual sense of distress. Secondary trauma occurs when witnessing traumatic events and produces similar physiological and psychological responses as primary trauma would. And finally, intrapersonal conflict. So in my work, in the conflict that I will be looking at, there's a lot of opportunities for moral injury to occur. Some of the details or some of the places. The nature of moral injury and intrapersonal conflict, in my experience, is one caused by the perceived inequality of educational access to students of low socioeconomic status with trauma histories and addiction issues. Additionally, the secondary trauma of working with these students cannot be overlooked. In my role, I'm often performing home visits where I'm confronted with the injustices and vagaries of at-risk lifestyles and systemic and institutionalized racism and classism. I'm also expected to assign a monetary value to the students by way of special education categorization and funding. This often demeans the student to becoming a dollar value and reduces them to a case study, which is meant to prove that additional supports are required. Many students are not successful in receiving additional funding based on their inability to follow through with the mandated counseling or other external agency supports. This work takes its toll on my ability to emotionally regulate and meaning make in light of these perceived inequalities and injustices. My moral compass maintains the positive nature of this intrapersonal conflict. This is just the nature of the work. Moral injury and secondary trauma are a necessary evil. They help with resilience building. And if I want to change the system, I need to engage with the system. And of course, my students are worth the fight and the risk. On the other hand, though, compassion fatigue, burnout are real risks of doing this work. So is compartmentalization and the dehumanization of children into numbers and dollar values. There's the meaninglessness of continued striving, which can lead to feeling as if you were just going through the motions. So in order to resolve this intrapersonal conflict, I could turn a blind eye, numb out, compartmentalize, and depersonalize the problems. I could look at changing my personal values, ethics, and morals. I could leave the current job position and the school, change the position within the school, share the caseload with another educator, seek outside emotional support, counseling, mental health care, and increase the advocacy work that I'm doing. In any of these cases, finding a BATNA, or best alternative to a negotiated agreement, is a challenging proposition when it's an intrapersonal conflict. There is little opportunity for external structures to change which means that the agreement must be internal in nature. In this case, I believe the best alternative to a negotiated agreement is one where I can continue to do the work that I so love, with additional supports such as counseling and mental health care. There is little way to change the systems that produce these moral injuries, so the best alternative is to find ways to work with and through the moral injury. The benefits of such an approach create the opportunity for greater personal discovery and forming strong boundaries around the work that I am able to take on. Given a magic wand, surely I would use it to improve the inequality in society and access to supports, both educational and social. Until the day arises, however, treating moral injury and the intrapersonal conflict it produces is an ongoing navigation through the muddy waters of values, ethics, and morality within a sense of personal meaning. Unfortunately, no resolution has been found yet. There's no easy way to reconcile moral injury and the internal conflict it created while maintaining employment in this role. The options of leaving the work behind, blindly ignoring the perceived injustice, and/or numbing out the effects of secondary trauma are unavailable in light of the strong moral urge to do what is right. Working towards reconciling these injustices against a foundation of personal meaning and resilience becomes an ongoing project. Taking a view towards existential meaning making may help to ameliorate, but takes time and much personal work. In the second conflict that I'd like to examine today, I will be looking at my time as a district Aboriginal education resource teacher. To set the background, I am a settler background, European Canadian history, middle class, and pretty removed from Indigenous culture. I was given a contract through the Ministry of Education and the local Aboriginal Education Department to create a language and culture curriculum for a local band. Unwelcome on the reserve land and unable to work with the band to create curriculum is the foundation of this conflict. When I look at the conflict, the colliding worldviews in this case are representative of the deep mistrust between Indigenous people in Canada and settlers, most especially when the white settler in question is a representative of the Canadian or provincial state. My point of view in this scenario is based on my academic history and rational in nature. I know that I am not intending to cause harm, and to use my education, background, and portfolio to assist in reconciliation. I've been trained in culturally responsive approaches, and through my work with the department, I feel that I've been vetted by district and local knowledge holders. In my worldview, I am working with to help and assist knowledge holders without taking personal credit. On the other side of this divide, however, is the previously mentioned mistrust of white settlers and governmental interference. The history of colonial violence and trauma is a visceral memory and present reality. I am also an unknown variable whose true intentions and purposes are not well known. There is a potential that I could cause harm based on my removal from the culture and privileged place in the dominant society. There is the chance, of course, that I will abuse the power granted to me and cause greater harm and reasons for mistrust when granted access to language, culture, and the history of the people. Additionally, there is the ever-looming specter of white saviorism, whereby a white person believes themselves to be the source of redemption, which will only infantilize and further dehumanize. Both of these viewpoints are personal, emotional, and true to their holders. In this conflict, the options for resolution are to be explored in light of the historical traumas of Indigenous people committed by white settlers. I do not wish to explore the options based around proving my own worthiness, as it would merely add to the misperception of white saviorism and fuel further the wariness of me and my work. To these ends, then, the options available to explore rely on how the contract can be employed with the safety, security, and sacred knowledge as paramount. Giving up the contract entirely based on the fears for further colonial harm is another option, but one in which I would lose face and further cement my untrustworthiness to the band should I ever work with them again. Therefore, finding ways to work with the chief and the band to get the work done, I could explore options for working with and through a third party that is trusted to create curriculum documents. Finding opportunities for a low-stake introduction off of the reserve or participating in activities when invited can help to build my trustworthiness. Holding humility and commitment are my prime values in this case, and my drive is to acquiesce to the need for if a negotiated agreement, such as a modification of contractual responsibilities, use of a third party to complete the work, or finding opportunities for low-stakes engagement is not found, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement in this scenario is to give up the contract and recommend another party to take on the work. As the only district resource teacher for Aboriginal education, this recommendation would hinder the timeline of progress and may result in a loss of face for my professional identity, but would protect the sacred and historical knowledge, language, and culture of the band. The Ministry of Education can employ another resource teacher, although they may not be a local person, but they could be Indigenous and a better candidate by the band standards. It also puts the responsibility for building curriculum off of my shoulders and places it back on the Ministry of Education to fulfill the edicts of the TRC's call to action around education. The work itself is more important than my professional ego, and despite the potential backlash for giving up the contract, I would be assured that any failure of the project would. In the end, I never went to the reserve to complete the contract, and in fact gave it up in part. While the contract mandated that a licensed teacher was responsible for the pedagogy and curricular alignment, it did not specify that the teacher be the one to complete the work itself. I took on the role then as advisor and editor of the work completed by the local education enhancement officer. I completed research on museum holdings and related to the band and found stores of past historical work, such as video and audio recordings of elders. I didn't end up working with the chief, his council, or elders directly, but rather supported from behind the scenes and signed off on the curriculum documents. I left the Aboriginal Education Department a few months later to return to the classroom and students, and the completion of this work fell to the new hire. She was of Indigenous ancestry and granted access and knowledge necessary to finalize and complete the curriculum. I have no hard feelings about the resolution to this conflict and believe that having even a limited role in this work held meaning and purpose. I'd like to thank you for your time in viewing this video. Here's a list of references that were used for the research, and I wish you a wonderful day.